Welcome back to the Leadership Lab. This is part 2 of the video that we were discussing executive functions. Now, I want to show you something, but before I do, go back to the first video so you know what we are talking about, okay? Welcome back. I'm going to show you exactly what each executive function looks like when your nervous system is regulated versus when it's dysregulated. As I go through this, I want you to do something. Circle or mentally flag which executive functions sound most familiar when you're dysregulated and which feel most familiar when you are regulated. Be honest with yourself. This is your map. So go grab a pen and paper and go grab somebody else to watch this video as well. We are about to walk through the full chart conversationally, and I will tell you what each executive function that we discussed in the first video looks like when you are regulated in your parasympathetic nervous system versus when you are dysregulated in your sympathetic nervous system. Let's start. All right, so here is the executive functions, clinical terms versus everyday language. And like I said, we are going to discuss what each of them look like when you are regulated versus dysregulated. Okay, so first up is response inhibition. All right, this is the ability to pause before reacting. Okay, this is self-restraint. So when you are regulated, you can think about consequences, you can perceive consequences, you choose your responses deliberately. When you are dysregulated, this is when you blurt things out, you might snap, you act before thinking, you regret responses that you made in the heat of the moment or ways you may have acted or even retreated in the heat of the moment. Next is working memory. Working memory is basically your mind's mental sticky notes, and this, when you are regulated, helps you to hold information in your mind while working. Okay, you follow multi-step tasks, you're able to connect new information to the past. When you are dysregulated, that causes brain fog. You lose track mid-task. You forget instructions almost immediately after hearing them. Next is emotional regulation, managing your emotions. What does it mean to regulate? That is when you can notice, understand, and manage what is happening. When you are regulated, you feel the emotions without being overwhelmed. You're able to return to your baseline. A level of resilience is present. You respond proportionately to events, okay? But when you are deregulated, there is a lot of emotional flooding, overreacting to small triggers, disproportionate to the reality of what's going on, maybe even shutting down or going emotionally numb. Next, you have sustained attention, staying focused. When you're regulated, you are able to stay on task with effort, okay? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but you have the ability to apply a certain level of effort to keep you on task. You are able to resist environmental distractions, complete meaningful work. But when you're dysregulated, your mind wanders uncontrollably. Hypervigilance pulls your attention towards potential threats constantly. It feels at least impossible to focus. Next is task initiation. This is getting started. When you are regulated, you have the ability to get started. You overcome that inertia. You start tasks when needed. You begin without excessive delay or avoidance, okay? But when you are dysregulated, it turns into paralysis, avoidance, procrastination, inability to start even tasks that you actually want to do. It just leads to these procrastination loops. Next is planning and prioritization. That is making a game plan, all right? When you are regulated, you get to see the big picture, sequences, steps, very logically. You identify what actually matters the most. When you are dysregulated, you become overwhelmed by where to begin. Everything feels equally urgent, reactive rather than proactive. All your planning and prioritizing goes out the window. Next is organization. All right, this is keeping things in order. When you're regulated, you're able to maintain reliable systems, find things quickly because you coordinated it that way. You create and sustain order without effort. I mean, you could use a little effort, but when you are dysregulated, chaos accumulates. Things get lost. You can't create systems even when you're trying to. Your organization goes out the window. Next is time management, okay? This is using your time wisely. When you're in a regulated state, you pretty much have an accurate sense of how long things take. You plan things realistically. You meet deadlines without crisis, okay? But when you're dysregulated, you have time blindness, okay? Chronic lateness or overscheduling, overcommitting, last minute panic as a default mode, maybe overcompensating for how early you show up, different things, but your time management goes out the window when you're dysregulated. Well, for everyone, it's different. Which executive function seems like it's your strong suit, and which one seems like you could use a little work? Which one do you usually feel most regulated while doing, and which one do you feel a bit dysregulated when you're engaging in? Drop your answers in the comments below. Next is goal-directed persistence. That is just following through. So when you are regulated, you follow through on long-term goals. You stay motivated through setbacks. You keep the end goal in sight, okay? But when you're dysregulated, you give up easily. When the obstacles arise and things start getting in the way, you only live in the immediate moment and your goals feel so unreachable. Next is cognitive flexibility. That is adapting to change. When you're regulated, this means you're able to adapt fluidly to change. You're able to consider multiple perspectives. You can pivot. You have a strategy when needed. But when you're dysregulated, it looks like being extremely rigid, stuck, my way or the highway, my way or nothing. You might struggle intensely when plans change or go wrong. Next up is metacognition. This is the ability to think about your thinking, getting a vantage point on your situation, being self-aware. Metacognition, when you're regulated, allows you to be self-aware of your own patterns, assess what you just did, analyze how you responded or behaved or what you need to do next. You're able to monitor your understanding, adjust your approach based on the feedback that you're able to give yourself. But when you're dysregulated, metacognition can't take a step back from its own thoughts. Your brain doesn't allow it. You're unaware of your errors in that moment. You can't self-correct or self-assess. Next is working memory updating. So this is updating your mental file cabinet. When you're regulated, you're able to refresh your mental content as new information starts to come in. You release outdated information easily and receive the new information. But when you are deregulated, you feel stuck on old information. It's almost like you can't integrate the new data that's coming in. You end up perseverating or repeating the same thoughts over and over without making room for new intel. Next is inhibitory control. So this is resisting temptation. When you're regulated, you can resist impulses and urges that come up. You're able to delay gratification much easier, suppressing those automatic reactions when needed. But in a dysregulated state or someone who struggles with this executive functioning skill, you might tend to give into your impulses, have difficulty resisting temptations. It's all or nothing behavior and really high extremes. Next is prospective memory. So this is remembering what you need to remember. With a regulated nervous system, it's fairly simple to remember to act at the right time, follow through on intentions, be reliable with commitments. But when we're dysregulated, what happens is your prospective memory goes down the drain. Well, for some people, right? But that looks like forgetting commitments entirely, missing appointments, good intentions consistently not followed through on though. And last is attentional control. So this is being able to direct your focus. When you're regulated, this looks like directing your focus with intention, filtering irrelevant stimuli out, shifting your attention fluidly when needed. But when you're dysregulated, it's an attention hijack. Okay, hijacked by distractions or threats or perceived threats. Your hypervigilant scanning goes online and you cannot filter out the noise. So I assume you guys just took some notes. And looking at what resonated with you, I want you to notice which executive functions are your strong suits and which ones do you feel like you could work on? Which ones suffer the most when you're dysregulated and which ones are you still able to have a pretty good grip on even when you're dysregulated? This isn't a character analysis or description. This isn't who you are. This is just what the nervous system does under threat. And when that happens, we want to use our metacognition and be aware of how we respond. Every single one of us has different executive functions that fall in the regulated or dysregulated column, the strong suit or the I need a little help in that area column. The question is how often, how intensely, and whether we know how to find our way back. All executive functions can be strengthened and can be worked on. So we want to figure out which ones we really want to start practicing to strengthen. So we all have executive functions. and they all work at different levels of intensity, frequency. There's some limitations, there's some strong suits. There's executive functions that really trip up when you're dysregulated, and there are some that you're able to approach with the regulated nervous system just naturally. The next part I want to talk about is understanding why this happens and what it means when we do get dysregulated or when we are able to stay regulated. The cool part about executive functions is that once they are developed and practiced, we do need to practice strengthening them. They can actually be used to intentionally regulate the nervous system. So on one hand, we talked about in a previous video how a dysregulated nervous system messes up your executive functions and kicks your prefrontal cortex offline. But on the other hand, the more you strengthen your executive functions, the more you can actually intentionally regulate your nervous system. So they go hand in hand, and it's pretty cool because this is one of the most empowering things to understand about your brain. You are not just a passenger. So there's a few directions you can go in. Direction 1, body to brain. When your nervous system is regulated, your prefrontal cortex has the resources to work. That's why good sleep dramatically improves decision making. A relaxing walk can suddenly make all solutions seem obvious. Breathing exercises before a hard task actually help, and a stressful morning can derail your whole day cognitively. Somatic regulation comes first when you take this direction. Before reaching for a productivity strategy, ask yourself, is my body actually in a state where my brain can do this? Direction number 2 is brain to body. As executive functions develop, the brain can actively signal safety to the nervous system, using thinking tools to create a physical state of calm. This is where emotional regulation gets enhanced, when your working memory helps you recall, I've handled hard things before. When your inhibitory control allows you to pause a panic spiral before it takes hold of your life. When your metacognition lets you notice, I'm catastrophizing right now, and then you're able to reframe it in real time. When your cognitive flexibility helps you to find a different interpretation of a stressful event. This is the neuroscience of coping. Practices like therapy, mindfulness, and CBT work partly because they train executive functions to interrupt automatic stress responses. So a calm nervous system is the prerequisite for executive functioning, but once executive functioning develops, it can be used as a tool to consciously calm a stressed nervous system. That's not a one-way street, that's a feedback loop. And whether that loop goes up or down is something you have more influence over than you've probably been told. So next we'll talk about the spirals. First, the upward spiral. This is building capacity, your ability to hold, okay? The regulated nervous system helps your executive functions work better. You can use your executive function tools to regulate. When you do that, you stay more regulated more often. Your executive functions continue to strengthen. You get a larger capacity to handle stress without dysregulating. The downward spiral, depletion, chronic stress. Your nervous system stays dysregulated. Executive function goes offline. You can't deploy coping strategies. You're more overwhelmed, more dysregulated. Executive function becomes even harder to access. The cycle deepens. Some of you are going to recognize the downward spiral immediately, not because you're broken, but because life is heavy sometimes, and the nervous system responds to that. Chronic stress, trauma, inconsistent environment, years of running on empty, these are conditions that create the spiral. If you're in the downward spiral, the entry point is almost always the body first. Somatic regulation, breathing, movement, grounding can interrupt the cycle at a physiological level, making space for your executive functioning to come back online. We'll get into exactly how in the next video, but for now, I want you to understand the map. So I'll leave you with this question. Which spiral do you feel the most often in your life right now? Upward or downward? You don't have to explain, just name it. Drop it in the comments, write some notes, talk to the people you're watching this video with. And if you're not sure, think about this. Do your executive functions feel more available to you lately or more out of reach for you lately? I'll see you in the next video.